Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Diary of a CMO. As always, I'm always excited for the guests that I bring on, and I keep saying this, and I sound like a broken record by now. I look for guests that I genuinely want to have a conversation with, and sometimes it feels like a conversation between me and the guest, and I can only hope that someone out there will find it useful. And thankfully, based on the feedback we've been receiving for the podcast, it looks like we're doing a decent job. Today, I have Ilaria Pasquinelli. Did I get that right? She
Yes,
is the
absolutely.
Chief Marketing Officer of the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and get to know you.
For those who are meeting you for the first time, Ilaria, please, how would you like to introduce yourself in just 2 minutes roundup? I know it's a difficult task judging by your profile, your resume, but please, in about a minute or two, for those who are meeting you for the first time, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Like you said, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Lions, the organizers of Cannes Lions. I've been in the marketing industry for more than 20 years and primarily in fashion, actually. My career has been shaped in the fashion industry. I've got 20 years in the industry. And then in the last 6 years, really, I moved to media and advertising. And I'm a brand builder. That's what I'm really excited about and forever in love with creativity, which clearly makes my role at Lions really exciting.
Interesting. So for the distinction, I know that we were having a conversation before I record. So for the distinction, for those who don't know, what's the distinction between Lions and Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity?
Lions really is the company
Got it.
that organizes Cannes Lions, and also Lions beyond Cannes Lions really has brands in its portfolio. There are like WARC that you mentioned, Contagious, Effies, and Acuity Pricing. So essentially, when I joined the business, really, Lions was mainly the festival, and over the years, in the last 5 years, has really invested in launching products, acquiring brands to become really relevant all year round and not just that week
Makes
in
sense.
Cannes, right, in June. When I say just, right, it's a
I get what
huge
I get what you mean. I get what you mean.
but
I get what you
but
I
we
get what you
know
mean.
that brands, marketers, creatives, they just need support to do work that really makes an impact all year round and not just in June.
Interesting. So just to reiterate, what are the other properties within that portfolio?
We've got WARC, really helping marketers really do marketing strategies that has an impact. Effie, it's all about marketing effectiveness.
Yeah.
Contagious is all about working with brands and creatives really to do breakthrough marketing. And then Acuity Pricing, which is mainly working with marketers, particularly retailers, marketers in retailers, to work on pricing strategies. They give pricing intelligence
Interesting.
for pricing decisions.
Got it. Wow. And
In
you work
essence,
across
it's everything. Yeah. So my role really is being in charge of marketing and creative for the whole of the portfolio of our product brands, for Lions, which is the master brand. And really a really important role that I have is really to make sure that we become, as a business, relevant and important and useful 365. And our main role and purpose in the world right now, as Lions, as our portfolio brands, is really to help CMOs particularly and marketing leaders to connect creativity and effectiveness with the boardroom growth agenda. It's all about making sure that businesses, the C-suite, particularly CEOs and CFOs, understand the power of creativity to drive business growth and to make sure that their businesses are relevant in the future.
Wow, that's amazing. So I mean, just for the people who are listening, for personal reasons, I'm going to focus on the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity, but I'm sure we're going to touch on some of the other things as well. But we're going to get into it now. I'm excited because there's a lot of I want to get your perspective on a number of things. Obviously, because you are sort of in the background, so to speak, of all of this conversations around marketing and brand building and effectiveness and all of these things. So it would be interesting to really get your perspective in this. My first question is going to be around just kind of looking at your move like in your career, which is that you've walked across these three incredible institutions that have shaped how brands think about effectiveness, creativity, foresight and things like that. I'm curious to ask, what has each chapter taught you about where the industry is headed, and how did each one prepare you for the next? So we can start with, how did each role from, whether it's to WGSN to WARC and then to Cannes Lions, or to Lions rather, how did each role sort of prepare you for the next? And with this sort of holistic view, where do you see the industry going?
Yeah, 100%. So before I go into a little bit of a personal context, when I moved to WGSN, so that was the first brand part of back then, the Essential portfolio. The parent company was Essential. Today, we are owned by Informa, right? That was 2016, okay?
Right.
That was my first ever proper role in B2B marketing. Before then, my career had always been in B2C marketing, particularly in fashion, apparel, and I had a really interesting career internationally. When I first got the opportunity to get into WGSN, I hesitated back then. 2016, B2B marketing seemed quite uninteresting, particularly from the lens of a B2C marketer that worked in fashion.
Right. I see what you
you
mean.
build brands, you've got big budgets, super cool, right? B2B felt pretty uninteresting, right? It had all of the characteristics that I didn't find interesting in marketing. Things like tiny budgets, focus on short-term performance marketing, rational marketing, advertising, left brain, all of those things. So I remember when I really had to make a decision to talk to, I talked to quite a few people in the industry, my friends and colleagues, and said, should I really take this role? And they said, why don't you think about actually what can you bring from your B2C experience into B2B?
Interesting.
That can make it more interesting.
Right.
And that's when I said, that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
Let's take it. And when I really joined WGSN, I really understood, and that was the first ever brand marketing role they built they created in the business. Prior to that, their marketing was very performance marketing led, right? I joined at a very interesting time where WGSN wanted to grow beyond fashion. That was their main industry. They were very known in the industry. They had no equity in other industries they wanted to break into. They needed to build the brand and use the equity they had in fashion for other industries, right? I thought it was really exciting, but also thought the challenge here is to reframe the role of marketing in these brands. And then I found the same situation when I joined WARC, and then later in Cannes Lions and Lions. What I brought to the businesses and what I thought was interesting was that actually the job to be done was to bring and put marketing at the heart of the business versus at the end of processes and decisions, and put creativity and emotions at the heart of marketing in B2B.
Interesting.
Frankly, it was lacking, but it was lacking in the B2B marketing industry in general. I have this book, which is called Baked In, Creating Products and Businesses that Market Themselves. It's an old book that basically say, really, you need to create products that have marketing baked in. Products that encourage conversations, community building, and that means really putting marketing at the beginning of decision-making, connecting marketing to the business strategy, and making sure the marketing really is in the room.
Right.
So what, really WGSN, WARC, and Cannes Lions taught me is that actually when you put marketing at the heart of the business, when you do marketing, really connect at human level with your audience, you have a massive impact and a big effect. But back then, it was really like quite a new thing to think like that in B2B, right? It was quite rational and left
Yeah.
brain and
Yeah.
features
Yeah.
led and all of that.
Yeah.
What I learned at WARC, particularly, as you can imagine, WARC being all about bringing evidence about marketing effectiveness and how you build marketing strategies for effectiveness. I really learned about the importance of effectiveness versus efficiency, right? Really making sure that you plan your marketing strategies, projects with effectiveness in mind from the beginning, and that then you really invest time, resources to then measure accurately and holistically what the impact of your marketing has been on the business, using the language of the business, particularly of CFOs, right? Connecting marketing metrics with financial metrics and business
Right.
metrics.
Right.
Actually, when I joined WARC, I thought, how the hell, have I lived without WARC until now? How the hell have I been a good marketer without WARC?
Interesting.
Because if you think about it, right, there's so much like content out there. Literally everyone that works in marketing writes something about marketing. But how do you know, right, if the insights that you're using for your thinking, for your ideas, how do you know that they are the right insights? How do you know if they are, who verifies them, right? And I see in WARC that sort of like, I know what I find in WARC is really trusted, and it's really, unbiased. They go around, they really literally work with the best in the world to bring best practice and, and unbiased evidence to marketers so that they can make the best possible decisions. So I really learned the importance of using the right insights, verified insights, to make sure that, the decisions are right.
With all of this experience that you've had, and I think that, just for the sake of those who may not know what WGSN is, what WARC is, I stumbled upon WGSN, like, I'd say probably about, give or take, about 8 years ago or something like that.
Right.
And when I did, I'll be honest with you, it became my secret weapon. Like, the kind of resource you find, and you kind of low-key hope that nobody else finds it.
Yep, I know what you mean.
I'm not even kidding with you. I'm not even kidding. Like, you low-key don't want anybody else to find it. I don't know what I was thinking, but the point is, the resource, or the amount of intellectual property, the amount of insight and knowledge you get from the resource that is published by that institution it's remarkable. And the same thing for WARC as well. My first boss was the one who introduced me to WARC. Like, this was very early on in my career, and she was like, you know what, when it comes to these conversations around insights and research and things like this, you have to be locked in on WARC. So for those who are listening to us for the first time, I want you to do one thing for me. Distinguish between WGSN and WARC. And then, the second part of my first question, which was, with all of these things, or your experience, where do you see the industry going in the future, in the next few years?
Yeah. So WGSN, really, they define themselves as trend forecasters. They started back in the years, decades ago, working mainly in the fashion industry, helping buyers, designers, those that make products, to really make sure that they created products that people wanted, products anchored in trends and in fashion trends. But then now they're actually more than that. They work with any sectors to make sure that marketers, product makers, anyone that really works in those businesses, really anchor those products and those businesses into the zeitgeist and cultural cultural trends, not just product trends. WARC really is the most reputed intelligence for marketers when it comes to anything that has to do with your strategic development as a marketer. You need insights as to what is the work that works, what are the strategies that really work, and why, and how do you really get to work that really is effective. So anything you need essentially in your day-to-day as a marketer, you go to WARC to find the best thinking, data, evidence that you need to do your job essentially every day. So it's a different, very complementary resources, but
very
very
complementary.
different, very, very, very different. I think the industry, where is it going?
Got
I
it.
mean, we could talk about this for the next probably 3 hours, right? But I'd say there's a lot of emphasis of finding effectiveness has been a conversation for decades, right? Marketing effectiveness, as in like really like get to work that really has an impact, has been top priority for brands for the last 4 decades since the IPA launched their
Right.
effectiveness award in the 80s. In the last 10 years, has been as a prominent conversation. That's going to be absolutely important. So the industry is going towards needing to prove how marketing really connects with business performance, right? In the short term, in the long term. Super important. The conversation around brand building versus performance marketing has been a conversation for a while, still very relevant. And the key challenge here is to make sure that actually you do both at the same time. There is an either or situation where I need to choose between doing performance marketing, therefore focusing on short-term sales, versus brand building in the long term. The best brands, the best marketing teams, they do both at the same times and reframe actually questions internally around is not asking questions around did this campaign work only. Next to that, you have you need to ask yourself questions, and how did this campaign build my brand, right? At the same time.
Got it.
So really
Got it.
important. AI undoubtedly, cannot not talk about AI. It was a big conversation, a big theme last year. The festival is going to be another big thing this year. I think the key here is in the industry is how do we become AI leaders, and how do we use AI capability building around AI to make sure that we really avoid using AI in a tactical way. I want to become more productive and use it strategically, right? How do we collaborate with AI so that
Right.
it helps us with innovation? So, but in order to do that, leaders first, they need to think about, learning and educating themselves on AI,
Right.
and then really helping the rest of the team, particularly middle managers, to connect AI with the ideas, the people, and the operations to
Mhm.
make it happen, right? And to really
Got it.
operationalize AI at scale. So I think that these are like movements that have been happening in industry for a while. Effectiveness, AI more recently, brand versus or with performance marketing, that are going to be absolutely important. And no doubt that brand building is the evergreen,
Yeah.
important element in the industry. No matter how good you are at using AI, but if you're not clear about what your promise to the customer is as a brand, it's not going to work, right?
Got it.
It's not going to be distinctive. It's not going to connect with the audience at the end
Right.
of the day.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Um, just kind of dialing back to WGSN right now.
Yep.
I mean, you more or less worked at the intersection of consumer trends and brand strategy, if I can put it that way. The question is, how can agencies and brands, move from simply identifying trends, just for the sake of it, in a sense, to embedding them into the work that they do, in building these commercially viable campaigns? How can agencies and brands move from simply identifying trends to embedding them into the work that they do? How do you recommend that agencies and brands do that, and not just identify trends for the sake of identifying?
Yeah, of course. By the way, my time at WGSN was fantastic. I worked, side by side with teams that predicted the orange wine was going to be a big thing, and it eventually became a big thing. Now I think it's a little bit passé, I have to say, but anyway, like I was saying before, it's beyond trends. I think trends is one thing, right? They imply it's a fading thing, right? But actually, it's really important to recognize that WGSN is really good at understanding societal shifts, cultural movements, that are shaping an industry, a consumer group, right? So it's really important, therefore, that brands and agencies with WGSN or with any other, like really, literally company or advisors they use, that they really are good at spotting those cultural movements that are really in sync with their audiences and their customer groups, right? One thing is to identify them, and of course, platforms like WGSN are good at that. But then brands need to connect their narratives to these cultural movements, these trends, right? And there you need to be very clear again what you stand for as a brand, where do you have permission to play, or what are the conversations your best place to say something, right? To join the conversations, and where really it's not your place to be and to be part of it. And then that's how you become, I'd say, culturally relevant. And that's when you as a brand, right, or your brands, if you're an agency, that's when they show up in social feeds. When people and humans think about their lives, they don't think about products, right? They just think about whatever. And that's when brands, when they become culturally relevant, where they connect with those cultural narratives, that's when they show up in social feeds, right? And become known and become relevant to people. But I think beyond that, beyond popularity and being known, I think brands should aspire to have an impact and meaningful impact on those audiences and and customer groups and communities they aspire to connect with. So it's about really playing a role in the in that cultural movement. For example, right, if I think about an example of this that comes to my mind, there's a home retailer in the UAE. And they just sell furniture, essentially. I think last year or a couple of years ago, they launched this campaign that's called the Homecoming campaign, that aimed essentially at change social attitudes towards children adoption, in the region, in Saudi, in countries surrounding countries. And that campaign, of course, that had an impact, massive impact on those societies, on those parents that maybe felt the stigma, right, to adopt children. But at the same time, it connected so much what they stand for and what eventually they sell, the product, right, home, the idea of home. So it's just a good example of that. When it comes to
Interesting.
agencies and brands, how do you operationalize insights that you get from WARC, for example, or WGSN, right? I'd say I've seen companies do that well when they create systems, knowledge transfer systems in the companies where they're able to create moments throughout their calendar where they share insights coming from WARC or coming from the festival, right? When they essentially create a calendar around WGSN when they launch their new future scenarios trends or Cannes Lions future creative trends, etc. When they really embed those moments into their calendars, and then they create a system internally to transfer this knowledge. Could be like creating regular moments with the teams or online repository where those insights, reports, presentations are saved. But also, they are really good at, these companies and agencies are really good at creating a culture of continuous learning, which is what you get when you get access to platforms like WARC, Contagious, WGSN, etc. So it's really operationalizing it and having people in charge of doing that, like people like accountable of, really being the contact person with our organizations, and then make sure that there's a system, a calendar in place for transferring all that knowledge back to the business.
Trends are sort of like, we tend to spot trends. We didn't quite, we're not intentional about creating the trends. There was a time where, unlike today, the social media language, where you can sort of create a trend, maybe it's a dance routine or whatever, but trend in the way that we are talking about it, consumer trends in the way that we're talking about it right now, typically it's just based on things that evolve organically, right? But I can't help but ask, like, in the case in the case where a brand or sort of leads, the change, I like to use an example from the Nigerian market where I am based, is that there was a niche culture that we refer to as alternative culture, which had, the archetypes of certain, adult males. They show up in, a Versace shirt with button down. They've got full beards. They've got about 3/4 pants on, boots on, and all this kind of. So there's this sort of, and at the time they were really, really sort of like a niche culture. But today, some of those nuance of this niche culture at the time is now fully mainstream. And a brand like Jameson more or less sort of spotted this consumer change, identified with that niche culture, and led that change. And what happened afterwards was 3 or 4 consecutive years of triple digit growth rates for the brand in the market, in volume and in value. So I'm just curious to asking, I think my question is, when you look at brands generally, what separates brands like Jameson, who lead consumer change and trends in the way that I've just described, versus brand who eventually see this, in the example I was given, this sort of alternative culture now becoming mainstream, now want to jump on it. Like, what separates those brands? Did you get my question yet?
Totally, absolutely. I'd say, in my view, a couple of things. Number one, those brands are really clear on who they're speaking to, who their audience is. It's not everybody. And they're not scared of looking at niches, untapped consumer needs or cultural niches that might be small to start with, but could become mainstream, right? So they're really clear who they're speaking with. They're really specific, right? They understand their community. I'd like to talk about community rather than audience, I'd say. And they're fully embedded into it. They're part of it rather than being outside of it, looking in a way. So they're really customer-centric, community-centric, and they're not scared of niches, right? They want to be specific, right? But to be specific, you really need to be to have a full understanding of the culture in that niche, in that community. You need to spend time with them. The other thing I'd say is that you need to have a really clear view of what you stand for as a brand. I know it's an obvious thing to say, but it's not so obvious to do it.
Yeah.
My firm belief is that the most powerful brands and businesses have a really clear brand point of view and brand strategy, and that influences the business strategy. It's not the other way around. Yes, of course, you've got a lot of businesses that don't have a brand strategy and they have their brand strategy being influenced by the business strategy. But I do believe that it's a lot more powerful to be clear as a business as to what your brand's role is in the world, and then make all the business decisions from, product decisions, structural decisions, who you hire, how, and all of that being influenced by the brand point of view. That's how you, again, mean something to somebody, even if it's a small niche in the first place. And then those businesses, I believe, have got really, they are able to nurture a culture of psychological safety in those teams, in those organizations.
Right.
If you really want to innovate, which is what the Nigerian business you were talking about, has been doing, then you need to be able to allow your teams to fail and to admit, look, I made a mistake. I tried. This is what I've learned. I'll do it differently next time. But to be able to do that, again, not an obvious thing to do. It's easier said than done. You need to have psychological safety, right? An environment where employees feel safe to take personal risks, interpersonal risks, essentially, without fearing for the consequences,
Right.
essentially. And the other thing, maybe finally, is that those businesses sometimes are not afraid to disrupt themselves. So it literally thinking, what could kill my brand today? What could kill my business today, right? if somebody came like starting from zero, what, could they kill my business? And, if yes, what do I need to do to disrupt myself to avoid from that harm, essentially?
Interesting. Thank you very much for that breakdown. So, just to kind of summarize that. So, one is being very clear on the audience that you were speaking to. Two, being very clear on what the brand is about, how the brand wants to position itself in the market. Three, creating a culture, an internal culture of an internal culture of sort of the willingness to disrupt yourself, an internal culture of allowing people to make mistakes, because that's part of innovating and in disrupting yourself. And I think across all of these four lenses, we're able to find brands that, sort of lead these consumer changes rather than the ones who kind of react to it. So I think that was very apt. I know you already touched on AI earlier, but if you don't mind, I just want to bring it back real quick before I move on to my next segment of questions. And this is about just kind of get your take on how global brands and agencies, as the case may be, are navigating this sort of global shift. I saw a creative, I think earlier this morning, it was a Vogue front cover, and on one side it's the static Vogue classic brand logo at the top, the image in the middle, and all of that sort of, really beautiful, glossy picture. On the left-hand side was this AI generated video of the same model walking on the clouds, like she was walking on a runway. And it's clearly AI generated, both the model, the static one, and the video one. And it becomes really interesting for brands like fashion brands like Vogue. Again, I don't know if Vogue put that out, but I just saw that, but I'm just referring to it to kind of see how, from your perspective, how are you seeing global brands navigate this shift? And what are your learnings so far? And what are your recommendations?
Yeah, I was reading something around, on Harvard Business Review the other day. There was a professor that said, obviously, AI would not.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Lara. In case you didn't notice, I used the Vogue example intentionally. So just carry on.
I thought so. No, I was saying,
You were reading something.
Yeah, on Harvard Business Review, there was this professor that said AI obviously won't replace humans, but humans with AI and a good knowledge of it will replace humans without AI, right? That quote stuck with me, right? And sort of prompted me to sort of say, look, I need to really up my game here with AI. I'm still learning, quite frankly, right? I'm still learning, but I've seen a shift.
We all are, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right. But maybe me more than anyone else. But I've seen a shift, right? I would be very interested to see how the conversation goes at Cannes Lions this year, right? Last year, I think, and the year before, there was still this thing around, AI will kill creativity, right? And all of that. I think we're moving away from that. And actually, we all know that it's not going to. But the conversation has shifted towards how can we work with AI to enhance and augment our creative capabilities, essentially, right? So I do think that there's a job to be done in terms of like I was saying before, getting leaders to be educated on AI. They have a key role, especially in this industry, right, where creativity really is at the heart, to advocate for the use of AI, but the right use of AI, right? It's not about replacing copywriters. It's not about firing all of our designers. Obviously, it is about making sure that AI augments their capabilities, abilities, and they just do amazing work, even more so than before. But there's a cultural transformation job here to be done. Often I see organizations, they're just given tools. Look, this is your new AI tool. Use it. The more you use it, the better it gets. But what about the cultural transformation that comes with it, that it's needed beyond just using a tool to make sure that we understand the power of AI and it really gets embedded into the workflows, the thinking, and we just need somebody, and this somebody needs to be the leader of a team, right? Leaders, therefore, to really like help their teams navigate all of this. And businesses need to invest in the cultural transformation that is required to be able to then use AI effectively beyond just using another tool, essentially.
Right.
And then you need the middle managers, right? Leaders are one thing, but then you need to operationalize it at scale, and you need middle managers again to be trained on how do you then embed it into ways of working, right? Project management and all of that. And then create a shared language around what it can do and the impact that it has had on a business or on a team.
Right.
I think, to me, every time we talk about AI, what really reminds me is the businesses that really want to future-proof themselves, they need to invest in capability building beyond the HR department. They really need to invest in a learning culture, particularly because technology, AI, but also technology at large, changes all the time, particularly in marketing, shall we say that?
Yeah.
So I think it's like literally training your team to be able to, to keep up and really use these tools, these technologies in the best possible way.
Right.
For the future benefit of the company. But that means that you do invest in capability building, and it's a strategic business driver rather than it's something you do on the side that your learning and development team owns. You need them, of course, they're partnership, but it is to be elevated at business strategy level, I'd say.
Interesting. I think one of the key points you've mentioned is the education part, which I think any company or any brand or agency who's not doing that right now, I think that I think they're messing around. I also like the recommendation around having sort of like internal champions in that sense, people whose part of your responsibility, as a matter of fact, KPI is to drive the AI education and adoption and all of those things internally. I think there's a lot to unpack in there. I want to talk about your time at work now, which is at work you had access to global data, if I put it that way. A sizable amount of data on what works and what doesn't in advertising. I want to ask you, what, in your opinion, are the top three? I do say opinion, but backed by that data that you're aware of. What are the top three insights, every brand or agency should adopt from that body of knowledge, from your experience and your knowledge of this, global data in terms of what works and what doesn't work in advertising? What are your top three insights that you believe every brand and agency should adopt from that body of knowledge?
Yeah. Thank God I still access WARC because it's still part of the Lions portfolio. I honestly, if I didn't have access to it, I would buy it. This is literally what I think as a marketer.
Right.
I'd say when it comes to really what works, really work marketing that really has an impact and is effective, creativity is number one, obviously. There's so much evidence, right? Years of evidence, right? There's a body of knowledge around the fact that really creativity is a competitive advantage for marketers. The quality of your creative, right, can improve our ROI by a factor of 12, right?
By a factor of what? 12?
12. It's massive, right? There's a lot of research around it. Creativity is number one. Totally in control of an advertiser, right, a brand, a marketing team, 100%. Media choice is also important, right? If you think about the role that media, the media mix really plays in marketing effectiveness. For example, TV, right, still is a media channel because of the attention, the visual attention, right, that it implies, right, really is a very effective channel. And then brand equity, right, is really important to drive effectiveness. The fact that you have invested in your brand consistently over the years, the fact that your brand has fame, your audience is already clear as to what you stand for, that improves the effectiveness of any campaign that you do. The WARC also talks about creative commitment. It is a really important one. Essentially, the three elements, like I was saying, definitely creative, the quality of it, but also the size of the budget is important for effectiveness.
Interesting. The size of the budget is important for effectiveness. I think we need to underline that, put it in bold caps. I mean, whatever,
And yet, if you look at, there's a recent report that WARC has launched just last month, that basically talks about the 5 ways CMOs can influence the C-suite. In there, there's a chart that shows how actually, despite knowing all of that, actually investment in marketing has been decreasing in the last few years as a percentage of a business's revenue, right?
Interesting.
So we know it, but still, marketers really find it really hard, right? We all find it hard to get more investment, right? So let's go back to creative commitment, creative, the size of the investment, but also the amount of media channels. Going back to the media mix, right, is really important. And the length.
You mentioned brand equity.
Brand equity and the length of the commitment, i.e., for how long your campaign is in market. There's a correlation between that and effectiveness.
I think that you talked just now. I chuckled when we talked about budget and all, and it's this conversation about brand building and performance marketing, and the pressure from CFOs and procurement and all of these things. I think that it's a familiar conversation for a lot of CFOs and marketing leaders. And even on this podcast, we've at different times had conversations about how marketing leaders can navigate those conversations. How would you recommend that marketing leaders navigate this sometimes very very sticky conversation with CFOs and the business in terms of value, what value marketing brings to the table, and all of those kinds of things? How do you recommend that CMOs or marketing leaders navigate that conversation with CFOs who, in some cases, not in all cases, require a certain level of ROI, and their definition of ROI is, classically money in the bank? How do you recommend the marketing leaders navigate that conversation when they find themselves in it?
Yeah, show, don't tell, always, right? Show the results, bring the evidence. CFOs, the C-suite, work really well with that, right? Alongside that, choose the metrics, the evidence that really talks to the CFO and to the CEO, and then typically is really translating marketing metrics into financial terms, right? As an example, it's not about long-term brand building, it's about future cash flow, right? Translating that for them, because at the end of the day, otherwise, it's fluffy and it's marketing jargony, and you don't want that, essentially, and you lose credibility, right? When you sort of then go into that. I think it's all about show, don't tell, use the right language, connect it to the boardroom growth agenda, and translating in financial terms. It's also important to be able to do that, then have a holistic measurement framework that really makes sure that you really measure the impact of all of your marketing activity, from short-term sales to long-term impact. And again, connected with future revenue, next quarter's revenue, profitability, rather than talk about brand building, talk about the price, strength that you have as a brand that you can impose in a way because you have got a strong brand, right? So yeah, it's all about that, in my view.
Yeah,
it's not easy, but we've got the tools at Lions.
Yeah, I love that actually. I love that actually. There's a lot of education that needs to be done for marketing leaders in terms of how to really navigate these conversations in a way that is meaningful to whether it's the CFO or the CEO, and still drives value for the tasks that we have as marketing leaders within those organizations. So thank you for those very practical recommendations. Kind of taking that a step further, do you think that creativity, and you've spoken about that, the importance of that, just now, but do you think that creativity and sort of like commercial performance, do you think that the relationship between these two is really where it needs to be? Sometimes it feels like there is a it's like in the boardroom or in these management meetings, it's like us versus them. We are the guys who are pushing for creativity. These guys are the ones pushing for commercial performance. In some organizations it's better, it's more sort of collaborative or integrated in a sense. What do you think, broadly speaking, with your view of a lot of markets and a lot of brands and agencies? Do you think that relationship or the conversation around that relationship is where it needs to be in terms of relationship between creativity and commercial performance?
The relationship, there's a clear evidence, like I was saying before, between like the impact of creativity on commercial results and impact, right? There's so much evidence. For example, we do a study every year at Alliance, the State of Creativity study that looks at the state of the creative industry, the trends, the challenges, the beliefs. And literally, we saw last year that brands are more likely to grow, are 6 times more likely, they grow more, are 6 times more likely to invest in creativity and have bigger budgets, right? So it's clear, right? The relationship is clear. But in the boardroom, the challenge is to prove it, right? To prove it with hard facts. Again, there are the facts, but sometimes it's difficult to have the holistic measurement framework in place to be able to directly correlate this activity with the business result or business effect. Partially the challenge is a language challenge, right? In the boardroom, there's a education that needs to happen, rather than education, I'd say an alignment between CMO, CEO, CFO, and the other C-suite stakeholders on what, how really does creativity have an impact on business and business results, and what are the different levels of business impacts. For example, in 2020, we launched, particularly WARC, Cannes Lions, with James Herman. We launched the Creative Effectiveness Ladder. I don't know if you are familiar with it.
No, I'm not.
It is an interesting framework, really designed to help marketers understand and improve the impact of creative marketing efforts. Essentially, it is a ladder that has 6 layers and 6 levels, and it identifies essentially 6 levels of effects, business effects, that a campaign can produce. From the bottom, which is called influential ideas, essentially is the least business effects. For example, a campaign, an idea that has created buzz, that has had a lot of shares on social media, right? Still good, but really not huge business impact. To the top of the ladder, which is the top level, is called enduring icon. At that level, those campaigns, those ideas, those projects, those programs create long-term brand and business effects like market share growth, revenue growth, profitability growth. And what the ladder does, apart from being a really tool and a framework for marketing teams to reflect on the work that they do and see what kinds of effects their marketing campaigns have had, what kinds of KPIs they are more important, right, connected to different levels. But it is also a really important tool in the C-suite to have a shared language around effectiveness. What do we mean by effectiveness? What kind of business effects do we expect to achieve if we do this, if we invest this versus that? And bringing examples of that, right? Because we've done it before, or we've explored at different levels of the ladder. So I think it's a lot of it is a measurement and a language challenge that can be solved with the right frameworks and with the right investment and commitment to measuring the right
Got it.
things.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Thank you very much for that. I cannot believe that we are approaching an hour already. I'm just going to try to, speed through the next 2 or 3 questions so that we can wrap this up. Thank you so much, Larry. I wanted to ask you about, and this is a very interesting question, just based off, the changes that have happened in recent times. When it comes to, the awards, right? Festival. What are some of the things that the jury or juries are rewarding today that they didn't 5 years ago? And I think on the backdrop of that is to kind of also, sort of reiterate what have you learned about the DNA of campaigns that go ahead to win? What are those things that really stand out? With campaigns that go on to win at the festival. And like I said earlier, what are the things that juries are rewarding today that they weren't rewarding or they weren't focusing on maybe, let's say maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
Yeah. So first of all, there isn't really a DNA of a line winning, like a specific formula, right? There aren't any formula. And also we rely on the 500 jurors that join us every year to judge the 30 lions, right? The 30 categories that we have at Cannes Lions, rely on them to define the benchmark for creative excellence every year. So it's really in their hands, their expertise. There are diverse teams coming from all over the world with different, really diverse background and areas of expertise. If I look at what they what the jurors look out when they judge the work, there are certain characteristics, right? Number one, emotional engagement, no doubt about that. That winning work often really taps into the power of emotions to cut through, right? And to really have a strong connection with their communities, with communities, audiences, with humans at the end of the day. Connect to that creative storytelling is really important, right? With ad blocking in mind, you just need relatable stories that cut through all of that, right? And really make people feel something through storytelling. Obvious thing to say, but still very important. Cultural relevance is also very important. Effective work often, winning work often resonates with cultural conversations and brand fame. That means that the jurors need to have the cultural context. Imagine that we have thousands of entries from 90 different countries, right? And 500 jurors judge these. When agencies, when creatives, when marketers, when brands enter the work, we ask them, what's the cultural context of this idea, right? If it's an idea from Nigeria, for example, what's the cultural context that the jurors need to be aware of? Because it might not be there. They might not be from there, although they're from so many countries. Like we've got jurors from 80 countries. Still, you just need to have that cultural context. So cultural salience and relevance is really important. Strategic clarity, super important. A clearly defined strategy is essential for, of course, to have a powerful idea, a strategy that connects with the universal customer truth. And then consistency and brand equity, sustaining a consistent creative strategy over time, over the years, can really enhance, as we know, brand equity. Think about the obvious cases, right? Dove and Real Beauty, brand platform, there have been, been existing for many, many years. Or Snickers, you're not you when you're hungry. Another example of that. Data-driven insights. Often jurors look at the use of data to inform campaign decisions. And sometimes the use of data to adapt your campaign or your idea while it's already in market. We've seen lots of ideas and lots of examples of those. But really clever use of data to enhance creativity. I'd say these are the elements, characteristics that jurors look out for. There will be others, right, for sure. And there are things that change every year. If I think about how the awards, what's important right now that might not have been important, not important many, many years ago, but anyway, what we're seeing, jurors award also a lot more is creative effectiveness, the impact of creativity. So it's not just about creativity, although
Got
there
it.
are some lines just focused on that.
I get what you
Obviously,
mean.
many
Right.
lines just focused on that. We've got a creative effectiveness lion, for example, that really awards work that has been previously awarded from a creative perspective and then can be entered into the creative effectiveness lion. And that really is all about awarding the business impact that it has had on a business, on a company, right? Effectiveness, given that it's so important in the industry, it will be important in the future, really important. We've seen the trend of humor and positive emotions soar in
Interesting.
awarded campaigns, simply
Interesting.
because creative work that has humor in it, it's just more memorable, it connects with people, it's distinctive, persuasive, and all that. Interesting. Low fee content, so that is sort of like enabled particularly not just but also startups and smaller companies to really compete with giants, right? To really like make sure that the idea was in like front and center despite low production budgets, I'd say, particularly relevant for lions like the social, all of the social media
Yeah.
channels,
Yeah.
relevant lions. And then I'd say sustainability and D&I, obviously very important.
Got it.
When agencies enter the work, we ask them questions around their CO2 impact of emissions, right? Their environmental impact, right, of those companies they enter work for, or the brands they directly. And we also ask them questions around what's the progress of those companies, of those clients, of those brands in terms of like sustainability and D&I initiatives. So we are a lot more interested in all of that and the commitment of those agencies and those brands in these topics.
Wow. 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 Thank you. Thank you. I think that really gives a lot of pointers to anyone who's listening in terms of the key areas to focus on. I was going to ask you this question, which might be a bit sticky, but it'll be interesting to get your perspective on it. Do you think that, obviously with the size of the festival and all of that stuff, I have had on this podcast conversations with CMOs from different regions, and there's a bit of no, not a concern. There's a bit of a feedback regarding representation. And I was going to ask you, do you think in terms of representation globally, do you think that the festival is doing enough to sort of level the playing field? From a sort of creative inclusion point of view, beyond the traditional power centers like the US, the UK, Western Europe, and things like that. Do you think that that the festival is doing enough to really drive inclusion across other regions beyond this traditional power centers?
We have been investing so much in this area because we number one, it's important that Cannes Lions really is a global platform for creativity, right? And not just a platform for a part of the world, but for truly the world. And it really is already. If you think about that, we've got work entered coming from 90 different countries. That's quite incredible. We've got jurors that come from regularly from more than 70, 80 countries judging the work. For example, we have had first-time representation from the Ivory Coast in the jury rooms, right? And Kazakhstan. And we also have this year the highest ever representation from Africa, the Middle East, and Asia when it comes to jurors. And the way we run, jury presidents run their jury rooms, those 30 rooms, is really important, and it's got like creative, like inclusion at the heart of it. For example, like I was saying before, we ask questions in the entry process about cultural context, right? So that you really get as much exposure as possible to the cultural context of a piece of work. Why was created in the first place? What's the societal sort of like context in which that piece of work lives? The diversity of our jurors obviously plays a big role in that. There's we nurture psychological safety, where jurors, of course, are there to challenge, right, safely and debate around the work and and the characteristics of of winning work. That really means, for example, right, that we have a lot of like winning work really comes from anywhere, and because amazing ideas really literally come from anywhere. Last year we had Iceland winning their first ever lion,
Yeah, I
and
saw that.
Kazakhstan as well, like massive celebrations in Kazakhstan, and Nigeria won their first lion in 2023. The winner went on national TV, and that had a massive ripple effect in not just Nigeria, also the Western Africa. So that was 2023 when Nigeria won their first lion. 2024, we saw an increase of entries from Nigeria by 90%, but also more entries from double-digit growth really across Western Africa. So I'd say there's a lot of, I do believe that Cannes Lions really is a global platform, and we're doing more essentially to make it even more a truly representative of the creativity of all parts of the world.
Wow, thank you very much for giving more for giving your perspective on it. I mean, the Nigeria award you referenced, it was almost a national celebration, if you get what I mean. And you are right in terms of the ripple effect it has across the continent. Because I have spoken to a lot of marketing leaders and CMOs on the continent, and it's interesting when I'm talking to a CMO from South Africa or Kenya who is referencing, that particular award. And I think everyone is sort of excited about this year, to see how it all plays out. Just as we start to round this up, because I've had you for very long on this podcast, I'm just going to quickly just slide this in there to say I will be reaching out maybe after the festival for a part 2 of this, because there's a lot more conversation. There's a lot more conversation I want to have with you. But I cannot help but ask you to. What can we expect? I mean, well, depending on when this airs, should I be asking this question because it might air? Anyway, what should people expect at the festival this year?
Oh my God, it's first of all like obviously a celebration of the most amazing creative work that's out there, and I just want to remind us that because the festival has been growing so much, and it's not only about the work, but it's always about the work at the end of the day. So it's also become such an important business moment for a lot of like media platforms, creators meeting, the brands and the clients, agencies meeting the clients. So the business side of the festival has been growing, but at the end of the day, it's always about the work and really being there to benchmark yourself, your work against the best in the world and really like celebrating it. I'm very excited about the B2B summit because me now working in B2B marketing, like I was saying before, things have been changing since 2016 when I joined B2B marketing, right? In 2022, we launched the Creative B2B Lion because we had been seeing a lot more entries from B2B work. And since we launched the B2B Lion in 2022, we've seen a massive the creative bar really has been raised in B2B. And this year we're for the first time doing a B2B summit in collaboration with LinkedIn to talk about the importance of creativity in B2B and all of that. There will be a lot of partnership activations, around the festival and incredible content on our stages from the best in the world, really. So
I'm excited to see, some of the reports that come out from the festival this year. Some of that, obviously, to see the winners. You spoke about B2B. I think he was the jury president, Andisan Sabani, the group CMO at Voder. So I had him on the podcast, and he spoke about the B2B creative lions with so much pride, and And for him was that, the fact that it took this long for that to be included, felt a way about it, but I mean, it's here now. And to see that we're kind of doubling down on that with the B2B summit, obviously it gets very exciting. And it can only get bigger. It can only get bigger. It can only get more representative of the industry as a whole. And I'm excited for that. With people like you and the rest of the team running the show, I have no doubt that the world is in for an incredible time, both for this year's edition and other editions to come. On a final note, Ilaria, I always like to get personal on this podcast, and I'm sorry if I put you on the spot. If you look at your career over the last, 10, 15, going up 20 or more years now,
Yeah.
what would you say um, is your, for lack of a better word, your biggest failure? Because we all make mistakes, we all fail at some point. What would you say is your moments that you're like, I could have done that, I could have done that better, or I could have done that differently? And what would you say has been your proudest moments? Do you get me?
Yeah. My proudest, let's start with the proudest moment.
Okay.
I am what really shaped my career the most, I'd say, and my mindset in this profession is being an immigrant. I left Italy, for 14 years, relocated to London, then Belgium, worked internationally, etc. And I really believe that when you are an immigrant, you never are not an immigrant, even if you go back to your roots in a way. And now I'm back, but still work internationally, of course. My proudest moment was to just literally starting from scratch and grow in this profession as an immigrant. When you're an immigrant, it's like you feel that you need to prove yourself twice or
Yeah.
three times,
Yeah.
and you really treasure every single opportunity that you're given. And so that I'd say that, and I come from a background of like literally nobody in my family or in my network knew what marketing was. I didn't know about the industry. So from not knowing the industry, randomly getting into the industry and then growing in it, of course, I'm very proud of it. And my parents are very proud of me. So yeah, that's a little bit my proudest moment. And in terms of failure, of course, I've had so many failures, to be honest with you. I fail every day. Starting my own business when I wasn't ready, for example, a few years ago, to sometimes not focusing on the right things,
Right.
being like, busyness sometimes runs my agenda, my diary rather than myself. But I'd say I wish I really had discovered marketing a little bit earlier, because I
Interesting.
didn't know about marketing when I really left high school.
Right.
And so all I wanted was to travel the world and find out about new cultures. And I thought that being an interpreter could be the right job for that. And I wasted a few years finding marketing in a way, start thinking, like realizing that actually that was a really good career for me. And so I had to randomly, end up in the industry. And then I loved it because I thought,
Wow.
wow, actually, it really connects you with humans at such an intimate level.
Yeah.
You're just there to create better things for them, better solutions, better, products. And yes, it gets you to, travel the world, and you connect with cultures. So yeah, but
Interesting.
maybe that's the biggest one. But you
Wow.
know what? I
Wow.
am where I am, and I've had my own journey, and everybody's journey is different.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, like if you were to speak to someone who was in your shoes as an immigrant, as an immigrant in whatever country or culture,
Hmm.
what would you say to them, who maybe as an immigrant in that country or culture, maybe, feel out of place, or maybe feel the need to work, extra hard to prove that, like, what would you say to that person, seeing that you have traveled that road yourself and you're where you are today? What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I'd say just bring your world to where you are, because you've got such a unique perspective and experience. Just make sure that you just bring it to where you're going, and that will inevitably add value, a different perspective that locals would not have, because they would not have had your experience, your background, your cultural references, right? And so think about more what you can add rather than what you don't have, because it just doesn't take you anywhere, that mindset, right? And just makes you feel just a little bit like out of place, like you say. Just focus on the positives, but also know that there's so many advantages of being an immigrant. One advantage is that the concept of home changes forever, and in a way, you don't have just one home. You've got multiple homes, and wherever you are, in a way, you belong a little bit everywhere, right? And that's a super power, I'd say.
Wow. Thank you very much for that, Ilaria. I'm glad
Pleasure.
we ended on that note. I typically start the podcast with more sort of personal conversations, but I'm glad we ended on that note. I think it's amazing, and I really always appreciate when my guests are willing to sort of strip off everything glossy and really speak on, sometimes in some cases, insecurities or experiences they're most proud of, and so on and so forth, but speak on it just because there might be someone out there who needs to hear it, which is why I'm super grateful that you allowed yourself to be vulnerable in the last minute or two to talk about it in the way that you did. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking the question.
Thank you. That's it for today. Oh my goodness. Oh boy. Oh man. I don't know why, it got a bit emotional for me just listening, but I'm gonna try to move on from that. But thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hilaria. I mean, I wish you all the best. I'm sure that you're going to get off this call and get back into the chaos or the madness of putting together, the festival and all of that. So I deeply appreciate you taking our time to do this. I really, really do. I don't take it lightly at all. Thank you very much. Do you have any last words, for people listening, for me? Any last words?
No, well, thank you for inviting me. Just, a reminder of what I always believe in, which is really creativity is so powerful. So let's all just invest in it. It really does shape not just business, but also society. So just a closing word, always back to creativity, because it's so powerful.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Ilaria. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. It's been an incredible episode. I wish I could go on, but we can't. It's already over an hour. Thank you so much. I'm sure you enjoyed yourself. I'm sure you have actionable tips and steps that you can take away from this. So I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Thank you very much for joining me. See you at work.